Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of ASKability. My name is Nico Meyering. I use he, him pronouns. For a visual description, I'm a white man with large glasses, floppy blonde hair. I'm wearing a light colored t-shirt and I'm seated in front of a purple background. I'm honored today to be joined by Zane Landin. Zane, can you introduce yourself to us, please?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Zane Landin, currently in California. I go by, my pronouns are he, him, his. I'm Hispanic, but I'm a light-skinned Hispanic. Brown curly hair, I'm wearing black, I'm wearing dark glasses, and my background is a dark, blurry brown. So I am a recent graduate. So I've been in California for 24 years.
Okay.
Recent graduate from Polytechnic with my Bachelor of Science in Communication and Public Relations. I'm just really passionate about storytelling, mental health, disability, accessibility, and using a way to use storytelling and creativity to explore these areas. Because a lot of times, in my opinion, I think the most important aspect of advocacy is storytelling, especially since people with disabilities have remained invisible for so long. I think it's about time that people see people with disabilities and seeing like authentic stories. And once like people without disabilities, it's, in my opinion, it's very hard for many reasons for people with disabilities to come out and disclose their disability. And so there may be people out there that don't really interact with people with disabilities. They might be because they may have non-apparent disabilities, so they may not be really understanding what it is to interact with a person with disability. And so actually having stories told about people with disabilities, now these people can actually learn what the community is like, what they're about. I mean, one of the good examples is Crip Camp. I'm glad that there was finally like a mainstream movie about disability. That it was still pretty niche. Like I heard about it a lot because again, I'm around people with disabilities and advocates, but it was great to see a lot of people experiencing that film that maybe didn't really know about the community and just kind of like learned about themselves and also what they can do for people with disabilities and just a broader awareness that, has been lacking for some time.
I love that introduction. I love your elevator speech, and congratulations on your recent graduation.
Thank you.
As another disabled storyteller, I feel really seen. So I see you in that. You mentioned accessibility, Zane, and this is why we're here. So let's get into it. What access features or tools do you use in daily life, and how do they help you?
For me, I don't use many,
Okay.
but what I do appreciate is when I see websites that you can actually physically change the website because you can actually make the text bigger or you can space it out. Because for me, sometimes I get migraines and my vision is not the best.
Okay.
So sometimes it's hard to read. And when I can zoom in or when like the text is actually more legible, like if it's Arial, if it's just more of an accessible font, it's just so much more helpful for me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yes, I see you in that. Many years ago, I had a Barnes & Noble reader called a Nook, and it was fantastic to be able to not only change font size, but also to like change light and display settings so that light wasn't always hitting my eyes all the time. I am a fairly voracious reader, so I got a lot of use out of that. Thank you for your answer. What access features or tools would make the biggest improvement in your life, and how would they do that? A bit of a thought experiment for you.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't use too many, but I would love to just see more websites adopt these accessibility menus. I think that they're really important, especially since they offer a wide range of different, accessible features. And when I see them, it's always exciting to see. And I also think that that's not an excuse to not build your website accessibly, because some people use that as a tool. And what I mean is like they use it as a tool to make up for their inaccessible website, when your website still needs to be accessible. But this is just an additional feature that can just make the experience better for everyone, especially for someone like me. Like my migraines and my vision, they're not necessarily as severe, as like it's not needed. It's just helpful. You know what I mean? Like, I don't actually need an accessibility feature, but it helps me a lot more. And so, you know, I can imagine how much more it would help others. And again, as someone who doesn't have or for people who don't have disabilities, it can just make the experience a lot better. As they always say, once you start building for accessibility and for people with disabilities, it's a better experience for everyone.
That's absolutely true. As we build things for disabled people, non-disabled people also benefit.
Yeah.
So there is that. Fantastic. I want to dive a bit more into something you began to cover when you gave your introduction, Zane, and that is kind of the disability community around you and how you engage with it, or not, you know, right? Some disabled people are kind of isolated geographically or digitally. So my question is, how are disabled people included or excluded in your community? Are there people or groups that are advocating for greater disability inclusion?
I will say that for me, I never really had a disability community that I was just a part of, if that makes
Okay.
any sense. I kind of had to insert myself. So I think the first community I was a part of that was, you know, the disability community was kind of when I was in high school,
All
and
right.
I joined the organization Best Buddies, if you've heard of it.
I've heard
It's
of Best Buddies, yes.
Yeah, so I first joined it, and this was a time where I didn't identify as having a disability, because it's actually been a recent revelation for me that wasn't really I wasn't really informed I had a disability growing up, and I was on a 504 plan, but I was never really told. So there was a long time where I didn't think I had a disability. So it's very interesting how I became part of the community and then learned I had one. And I was like, oh, I was a part of this community the whole time. But what I love the most about the disability community, you know, this is not the entire community, but the ones I got to associate with, they were so very welcoming to like people or allies, you know what I mean? And so like, so again, I came in as someone that didn't know they had a disability. They were still so open and engaging and inclusive than I could say about other communities I actually identified with at the time, which was kind of an unfortunate thing. Like, even me identifying as Hispanic and queer, I felt more safe and more welcomed in the disability community than the other ones, which I don't know why that is, but that just kind of how it went. But so, like I said, when I first joined the disability community, I joined the Access and Disability Alliance at my school, this was when I was in university. I'm like going forward, sorry.
That's okay.
But so basically I became a strong advocate, because in high school I joined and I loved it, but I didn't become a strong advocate till university around my third year, where I joined the Access and uh, Access and Disability Alliance. That's right. Sorry. And that was the first group I really joined that, like I said, made me feel really welcome. And then it was since then that I was able to interact with a lot of people with disabilities because of that. And I joined so many more organizations after that. Then I joined a lot of mental health organizations. So I will say what I've learned about how people with disabilities are included, a lot of times they're not.
Okay.
And that's my experience. Like, when I would be in certain workplaces or being a part of different social justice groups, there was never any talk of intersectionality about disability. Very rarely. I think the one time I saw it at my university was they had the queer the queer cultural center. They hosted a conversation about ableism and being queer.
Okay.
And so that was interesting. But I knew that the coordinator of the center had a disability and cared a lot about it, which is good. But like, I don't know if there's a lot of people behind that, you know what I mean? And so, you know, there's so many different cultural centers, but like, there was roughly very little talk about disability involved in that intersectionality, which is unfortunate, because intersectionality actually branches off in every single community, that it's actually incredibly important that we talk about it. And I think a lot of people have the misconception that disability is a very small community. It's very large, actually. It's literally the largest minority group in the world. So it's just a huge disservice when I don't see that. And, you know, just hearing about a lot of like different ways that people with disabilities have been excluded and discriminated against, and that's why you see like the unemployment rate really high for people with disabilities. And a lot of people, of course, will think, you know, the stereotype that people with disabilities can't work, which is not really true. And so it's very unfortunate that that persists and it exists. But that's kind of like what I've seen, that people with disabilities are not really included, but I'm seeing more of a push now than I did a couple of years ago. And again, I'm still very new. Like I've really only been in this like 4 or 5 years, or 3 to 4 years. But you know, I remember when I would go on LinkedIn, I wouldn't see a lot, but now I see a lot of talk on LinkedIn and different social channels about disability, more so than I think it's grown really fast, but of course there's still a lot of work. But and even I interned at like a couple companies where they actually talk about disability, and they actually did stuff for Disability Pride Month. I did an internship last summer at General Motors, and I got to lead the Twitter campaign for Disability Pride Month, and we featured actual people with disabilities from the company. And I was so happy to see that, for one, because it was exciting to lead something and for an internship. And then another thing was, I wasn't seeing any other companies doing this. I wasn't seeing many, or I mean, I didn't see any, but I'm sure there were some. But I really did not see any that were highlighting the voices of disability during Disability Pride Month. And again, to me, that's like the bare minimum, because that's, you know, that's like what you hear, like, oh, it's Pride Month, or it's a LGBTQ Pride Month, we're going to share queer voices. Well, that's the bare minimum, because you should always be sharing queer voices. But I still think it's a good first step, and I love that that General Motors was able to do that. And they also just have a really great disability employee resource group. And I've been in other companies where there was no disability employee resource group, which I think every company needs.
I see you in that. And when you say things like companies might only celebrate during Disability Pride Month, or for Pride Month for our queer brethren, I don't know about you, Zane, but I happen to be disabled 12 months out of the year.
Yes.
Is it the same for you?
Yes, it doesn't go away.
No, I'm only disabled part-time. Thank you for this answer. It was fantastic that you got to handle the Twitter for GM. As someone whose parents come from Michigan, and
great.
are big like motorheads, that hits with me. So I love to hear about companies like GM getting in on that inclusion.
Yeah.
How would you specifically, Zane, benefit from better disability inclusion?
Oh wow. I mean, I would feel like I can bring myself to the table,
Okay.
your entire authentic self. And I feel like the more identities you get to bring to work, you know, the more authentic you get to be, I think the more excited you are about the work, the more productive you are, and the more empowered you feel. You know, what I've learned is I really like talking about my disability identity. I like talking about the community because it's really important to me. And if I'm in a workplace where I can't do that, the work does not feel rewarding to me. Even if the work is like supporting nonprofits or just doing good in the world, I would still feel unincluded because I can't bring my entire self to work, and it wouldn't feel rewarding because I want to bring that. And if a company is doing good, but they're not promoting a good workplace environment, they may be doing good for the community, but their inner community is lacking. And that's one of the most important things. I mean, they say that your employees are your biggest stakeholder, and I think that they are, because without them, you don't have a company. So that is what I would say, that, you know, if we have more disability inclusion, even having a disability employee resource group, I think it just changes so much, and it creates a community rather than someone having to do all the work on their own. Because I think one of the problems is, and I've never experienced this, but I hear it all the time, where someone does speak out about disability, leadership may not be receptive to it, or maybe they are, but that person becomes an assigned pseudo token, you know what I mean? And that's probably the most frustrating thing, because there's literally a spectrum of disability. And so a person who, whatever their disability is, they don't represent the community, and they don't know every single thing or piece of knowledge. So it's a huge burden that they have to carry, and it's not right that they do, when in reality, they're not going to reflect the disability community the best anyways, because they're just one person. You know what I mean? If you're going to think about it, if you're going to write like a whole script about a disability movie, and you just have 1 or 2 writers and they have the same disability, you're not going to get that authentic scope of disability, because you need the diverse writers, the diverse workers. So it's like a hard thing to ask one person. They can't reflect the whole community, or parts of it, you know, like the majority of it, because they have just their experience. And I'm not saying that's not valuable, but that's definitely valuable, and it's a rewarding thing to have and to describe. But I'm saying is, you need more than that. And so you need to not be assigning tokens. You need to definitely be looking at structurally how you can actually create a more sustainable, inclusive model. And if that's even, like I said, creating ERG, even just putting out there that we are clear that we are anti-ableism here, and we are welcoming to people with disabilities, and even making sure that, you know, the job descriptions are inclusive, that no, you don't need to carry 50 pounds at an office job. You probably don't need to do that. And then when you see that in a person with disability who can't lift that, they may not think they can apply. And it's sad that they will be excluded if they do not fulfill these ridiculous expectations, because a lot of these jobs where it says you need to carry, only be able to lift 50 pounds or 25 pounds, you really don't. And if you can't, you can just ask someone. So it's very upsetting that they'll use that as a contributing factor to not hire someone, which is another ableist factor. And then another thing is making sure that, of course, we go back to accessibility, making sure that all things are accessible, making sure that your social media is accessible, your storytelling, making sure that your websites are, everything, making sure your buildings are, making sure the equipment's accessible. There's so many things to make things more inclusive to people with disabilities. And accessibility is like the most important, because I hear stories of people who start jobs and they don't have the equipment for accessibility. So the person has to wait like a month or two and have to wait till they can get the equipment. Instead of having the equipment already set or having inclusive technology there, assistive technology. It's unfortunate when that happens. So there's a lot of different things that companies can do to create a better disability environment. And it's also, in my opinion, again, I'm not like a CEO, but I don't imagine it's super hard. You know, like a lot of people say it's too much work, it's too expensive. It's not. And it's actually not to include all these accommodations. It's not super expensive. That's another misconception, that it's really expensive. And then another thing, if you're not going to engage in the disability community internally and externally, from a business perspective, you're going to miss out on a huge market, because there's so many people with disabilities. They're a huge consumer market. You don't want to miss out on potential consumers. That's kind of from a business standpoint. But, you know, my mind is you want to, you know, engage and, you know, be inclusive to these people. But, you know, from a business perspective, you're also going to be losing out when you don't bring, you know, engage with these communities, because it's again, disability is the largest community. You don't want to miss out on working with them and making sure that your products are worn by them, or, you know, are used by them. So there's a lot of different things.
That's incredibly valid. Yes. And I think it is also true if you look at it from a talent acquisition perspective, right?
Yeah.
Disabled people are talented. Disabled people are passionate. They have niche knowledge. They have applicable knowledge to all kinds of job positions. So if you're not including disabled people in your employee search, that really hobbles your business and your endeavor. I think we also, going back to your point about, you know, if you do disclose that you're disabled in a job and then you're pigeonholed into just diversity roles or just disability inclusion roles.
Yeah.
You know, we as disabled people, we deserve to see ourselves reflected at every level of an organization. So think about some big name CEOs. It's cool that Sir Richard Branson from Virgin says, I'm dyslexic and I really see it as a superpower. That's fantastic for him, but unless his company also has disabled employees at as many levels of their organization as possible.
Yeah.
And the same thing for Elon Musk and Tesla. So Elon says that he's on the autism spectrum. Okay, but what are you doing for disabled people at your company? So there's that as well. Get on there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those are really good points. I didn't know about the first CEO, but I love what you said about DEI roles, because like that's true. I didn't think about that. You know, like, yeah, people with disabilities may be pigeonholed to doing DEI work, which again I feel like is another, like, kind of like what I was going back with serving as tokens, that they're doing the DEI work because they're the ones with lived experience, which means they're the ones that have to fix everything. When again, the burden should not be on them. If they want to go into DEI roles, that's different. But like to be pushed into doing DEI work is time and time again, I see, you know, companies that'll assign like work that's on someone's description about DEI on people because they think that they can solve it on top of their job. And they may not be given added compensation for it either. And we hear that a lot too. A lot of people with disabilities are not compensated. through like a lot of things like speaking roles or all these different things where they educate people about their disability or the community, and they're not compensated, which is a huge issue. And that's why you see a lot of, it's unfortunate, but you see a lot of people with disabilities as entrepreneurs. And I think it's great that they're entrepreneurs, but like it's sad that like they have to be entrepreneurs just to survive, because they may not be hired because of these discriminatory practices, or they may have opportunities to do great things like speak, but they're not compensated for it. So, you know, it's unfortunate.
I mean, there's also disabled people who genuinely do want to be entrepreneurs and freelancers, but
Right.
you know, there comes a heavy cost, and that is lack of
Right.
benefits.
Yeah.
In most cases. So yeah, that's tough. Zane, that was the last of my planned questions, and we are coming up on time, but this is your space now to promote yourself, to talk about any projects or concepts that you're working on. The floor is yours. This is your soapbox moment, my friend. Give it to us.
Yay, thanks. Thank you. Well, thank you for the interview. I will just say, please check me out. I always love talking about disability. So if you need a speaker or have questions about starting an ERG, I don't know too much about that, but I work with some big ones that have done really well. And if you have questions about intersectionality, because I love talking about being queer, Hispanic, having a disability, there's a lot of different dynamics there. And so if you ever need a speaker, or if you have questions, or if you ever just want to chat, please let me know. Please follow me on just my personal Instagram and my personal LinkedIn. And yeah, if you ever need anything, yeah, please let me know. I'm always willing to help or volunteer with whatever you're doing.
This is so fantastic. Now, you mentioned some of your social media channels. Where can people find you online?
Oh, I probably should have said that.
Yeah.
So I mentioned LinkedIn and Instagram. So basically it's just my name. So Zane Landin. That's basically my handle for both. So I'm always on it. So please let me know if you have questions, and that's where you can find me.
Fantastic. Zane, thank you so much for your time, and we'll end the recording here.